Greetings. We're a month now counting towards Pentecost. And in America, this is the weekend, Memorial Day weekend. And it's a day when America honors its war dead. Unfortunately, America suffered through the war between the states, a civil war, and that's the origin of this Memorial Day. It originated in the aftermath of the American Civil War. Today I'm going to talk about a civil war that took place in ancient Israel, a war between tribes. But before I get to that, on a lighter note, I have a riddle for you. Why does history keep repeating itself? Why does history keep repeating itself? Because we don't listen the first time. You'll be hearing more about that as we go along. The topic today is a tribe rescued, lessons learned. But before I get to that, I do want to add something to my talk from last week. Last week I spoke about what Jesus Christ said about himself in the writings of the Apostle John. And I want to go to the 4th chapter of John, where he is speaking with the Samaritan woman. And in the 25th verse, the woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming. And of course, because this is written in Greek, the term is translated, who is called Christ. I have in my Bible. The woman said to him, I know the Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. Jesus said to her, a more literal rendering of the Greek is, I am the one speaking to you. I am the one speaking to you. So in effect he's saying, you're speaking to the Messiah. And again, he just says, I am. The Greek is just ego in me. There's no he there. So again, it leads you back to the burning bush episode. And then in the 18th chapter of John, when Pilate asked Jesus whether or not he's a king, in verse 36 of John 18, Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I would not be delivered to the Jews, but now my kingdom is not from here. So therefore, in verse 37, Pilate therefore said to him, are you a king then? Jesus answered, you rightly say that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who's of the truth hears my voice. And so he does, in effect, claim he is a king, but not for that time. And we all understand he is coming again, and indeed he is coming to rule the world. And that does tie in with my talk today. As I said, I want to talk today about a tribe rescued, lessons learned. The 12 tribes of Israel are very important in the Bible, from Genesis through Revelation. In Revelation 21, the New Jerusalem, and in verse 12, also she had a great and high wall, and with 12 gates, and 12 angels at the gate, and names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. And there's also a relationship between them and the 12 apostles. In verse 14 of Revelation 21, now the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. I'll say more about the relationship of the 12 apostles to the 12 tribes. But as you know, the 12 tribes of Israel are mentioned in Revelation 7, and I want to focus on the tribe of Benjamin. In Revelation 7 and in verse 8, it speaks of Zebulun, Joseph, and then finally of the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000 were sealed. So here we have the 144,000, including 12,000 of the tribe of Benjamin. That's Revelation 7 and verse 8. Now, the relationship that I was going to talk about between the apostles and the 12 tribes, I want to go to Matthew 19 and then to verse 28, where Peter asks a question. He was more forward than the others, it seems, in terms of just saying what was on his mind. And in John 19 and verse 28, let's go to verse 27. Then Peter answered and said to him, see, what we have left all and followed you. Therefore, what shall we have? So Jesus said to them, assuredly I say to you that in the regeneration, when the Son of Man sits on the throne of his glory, you who have followed me will sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So the 12 apostles in the millennium, under David will rule over Israel. Jesus Christ will be over David. David will be over the 12 apostles, and the 12 apostles will be over each one over one of the tribes of Israel. And I want to talk today about the tribe of Benjamin. It's a very important tribe in the Bible. Well, each tribe has its unique importance, but I want to focus on Benjamin tonight, or whenever you hear this. Mordecai came from Benjamin. The Apostle Paul came from Benjamin. The first king of Israel, Saul, came from Benjamin, and his daughter, Michal, M-I-C-H-A-L in the English, was the first wife of David. And Benjamin was the last son that Jacob had. You know, he was a son when Jacob was quite old, in the last of the sons, and he was also the second son of Rachel, the beloved of Jacob. Joseph, the firstborn of Rachel, was given ultimately the birthright, so Benjamin would have had some importance to Jacob too, as the only other son of Rachel. After having Benjamin, she died in the process of giving birth to Benjamin, and Jacob called him Binyamin, or the son of the right hand, son of the right. And in the Middle East, you face east, and south is on your right. For example, in the Arabian Peninsula today, probably that's why we have Yemen in the south of that peninsula. So Benjamin was born to the south of all the other sons. He was the only son born in the Holy Land. So I want to mention a time which of course would be a very embarrassing time for the Benjamites to look back on, but it just is an indication of what happened to ancient Israel, and what happens to a people, when they abandon what they know to be right, and they begin to make compromises and drift away. I want to go to Judges, to the second chapter of Judges. Now Israel was, of course, wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. And then Moses dies, Joshua takes over, they conquer the land. And then in verse 7, it mentions, so the people of Judges 2:7. So the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua. And by the way, one other comment I wanted to make. Last week I spoke about Christ as the head of the church. I want to refer you to also Ephesians, the 5th chapter, that brings that out quite explicitly. Jesus Christ is the head of the church. In Ephesians 5, I want to mention that. Now I want to go back to the Judges here. Judges 2:7. So the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works of the Lord which he had done for Israel. Let's go to verse 10. When all the generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord, nor the work which he had done for Israel. Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and served the Baals. So I just read verses 10 and 11. So over a period of time, and I would imagine, as people are born and they come to adulthood, perhaps it took about 20 years or so. I'm speculating, and Israel forgot what it should have learned, what it should have known. Joshua was dead by this time. The elders that had ruled, that he had trained, they were dead, and so people now began to become too mature, and they unfortunately had not directly been there in the wilderness and been there when the land was conquered, and so they abandoned what they should have known. Now at this time, we're early, of course, in the period of the judges. It didn't take, as I said, all that long for them to deteriorate in this way, unfortunately. At this time, then, the grandson of Moses was still alive, and you can read about his what happened to him, which isn't complimentary, but in Judges 19, earlier in Judges 17, we read about the grandson of Moses, and then later on you'll see we'll be reading about Phinehas, the high priest, who was alive during the wilderness experience and did a great deed, a great heroic deed during that time, but he lived on after the conquest of the land for a period of time and was still alive early in the time of the book of Judges. But it's interesting. It's at the end of the book of Judges that we see these events talked about. What happened to Gershom? Gershom was Moses' son. His grandson was Jonathan. So I want to be clear about that. We can read about him in Judges 18:30. Judges 17 begins the account, and then in 18:30 we can read about Jonathan, the son of Gershom, and here it says the son of Manasseh. But if you look at a footnote, there should be a footnote that says that really it's Moses, but I won't go into that tonight. I'll maybe go into that another time, why your Bible says Manasseh and the footnote says Moses. Anyway, but his name was Jonathan. So this would have been early in the period of the Judges. And then we come to Judges 19. And again, this is early in the period of the Judges. But it's put at the end, I think, for the reason I think these are put at the end is because what Jonathan did for the tribe of Dan was something which became a foundation for the way they behaved all the way through their history, and ultimately influencing the rest of the northern tribes in a way. And so it's put at the end, but also we have this account of the tribe of Benjamin put at the end because the tribe of Benjamin almost was wiped out, but it survived and then gave us the first king of Israel, and the account is put here. And later on we have some, as I said, great heroes of Saul. Unfortunately, didn't pan out, but Mordecai certainly did, and the Apostle Paul certainly did. So we can be grateful, of course. God, of course, was going to preserve Benjamin, but the way Benjamin was preserved was rather messy, and that's the way history is. History is messy, and if you read the Bible, it doesn't hide the faults of its heroes. You read about Jacob, you read about David, you read about the great heroes of the Bible, but you also see their flaws. You read about Israel, the chosen people. You also see their flaws. History is messy, and certainly this account is a rather messy account. But it's in the Bible for us to appreciate, for us to understand, and it is interesting how one tribe was almost wiped out and how it was preserved. So I'm in Judges 19, and we begin. And it came to pass in those days. And by the way, I want to go back to Judges 17 for a very important verse in that chapter. Judges 17 and verse 6. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Well, you can understand what could happen in a case like that. And the same thing is repeated in Judges 19. And we'll get to that in a moment. Well, right from the beginning. And it came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel. See, it's brought out again. This was a time when it was great decentralization, and there was each tribe was very individual, but even within the tribes, there were different clans with different approaches to things. And it came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel that there was a certain Levite staying in the remote mountains of Ephraim, or Ephraim, and we say in America Ephraim. He took for himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. But his concubine played the harlot against him, and went away with him to her father's house in Bethlehem, in Judah, and was there for 4 whole months. So you see, it's already messy, the first couple of verses. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back, having his servant and a couple of donkeys with him. So she brought him into her father's house, and when the father of the young woman saw him, he was glad to meet him. So there was this was, you could say in a way, his father-in-law. She wasn't completely his wife; she was his concubine. So it's awkward from the beginning. But anyway, they have a relationship similar to marriage. So this is his father-in-law in verse 4, and his father-in-law kept telling him, "Stay, don't leave." And it got to the point where finally the man said, I've just got to leave. But at that point, after several days, by the time he had to leave, it was kind of late, and so he left when it was he wouldn't be able to go that far. Let's go to verse 10. However, the man was not willing to spend that night. He figured he'd been there long enough. He had to get out of there. But he was delayed, and he wound up leaving perhaps too late, so that he wouldn't go where he really wanted to go that night. He would have to stop short, and that's where the problem occurred. However, so I'm in verse 10 now. However, the man was not willing to spend that night, so he rose and departed and came opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. So Jebus was at that time occupied by Canaanites. If you look back, you'll find that the Israelites did conquer the area, but evidently over time abandoned it, or the Canaanites came back and repopulated it. So at this point in time, it really was no longer an Israelite city. It had reverted back to becoming a Canaanite city, and later on David had to conquer it, and he did conquer it, and it became his capital, Jerusalem, D.C., Jerusalem, David's capital. And but at this time in history, the Canaanites had reoccupied it evidently, so it was in that sense a Gentile city. So they were near Jebus, and the day was far spent. And the servant said to his master, "Come, please, and let us turn aside into the city of the Jebusites and lodge in it." But his master said to him, "We will not turn aside here into a city of foreigners who are not of the children of Israel. We will go on to Gibeah." So he didn't want to go to these Canaanites. He wanted to go to an Israelite city, which is ironic when you consider what happened. So he said to his servant, "Come, let us draw near to one of these places and spend the night in Gibeah or in Ramah," which is Benjamite territory. He was a Levite, it says. His wife was of Judah, but he's going to an Israelite place, the tribe of Benjamin. They turned aside here to go into lodge at Gibeah, and when he went, he sat down in the open square of the city, for no one would take them in to his house to spend the night. Well, that's bad already. What kind of people are these people to not want to help him out in that way? A fellow Israelite, a Levite to boot, And he did have enough for himself. All they would have had to do was just give him a place to stay. It's very much like Sodom and Gomorrah when the two angels come there. They're out in the open, and then Lot says, no, you got to come in. And that's what happens here. Somebody finds them and brings them in. And so now we come to verse 22. So somebody did finally come and give them a place to stay. And they were having a good time together. Verse 22. And as they were enjoying themselves, suddenly certain men of the city, perverted men, surrounded the... I'm looking for the footnote here, because it may be that... I was thinking perhaps the Hebrew term is the sons of Belial. I have to check that out. But anyway, perverted men surrounded the house and beat on the door. They spoke to the master of the house, the old man, saying, "Bring out the man who came to us, that we may know him." And obviously, my translation adds carnally. So here we have homosexual rape about to take place, like we had in Sodom. you know. And but these are Israelites. These are people who, you know, they supposedly have God's law. They had Joshua. They had the elders. But the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, "No, my brethren, I beg you, do not act so wickedly. Seeing this man has come into my house, do not commit this outrage." So there's a very important principle in the Middle East of hospitality to guests, even though most of these people had violated it, but he did not. So it was so important to preserve the hospitality to the guest that he was willing to do what Lot was willing to do. If you go back to Genesis 19, it'd be rather shocking what Lot proposed, but we have something similar here. "Look, here is my virgin daughter and the man's concubine. Let me bring them out now. Humble them and do with them as you please, but to this man do not do such a vile thing." But the men would not heed him. So obviously, this is perversion on many levels, and so that's we do not do such a vile thing. But the men would not heed him. So the man took his concubine and brought her out to them. So, he did it, and he saved himself and the rest of the family from whatever they might have done. But now they've got this concubine. But anyway, so in verse 25, but the men would not heed him. So the man took his concubine and brought her out to them, and they knew her and abused her all night until morning. And when they began to break, they let her go. You read this and it's very, very tragic. Then the woman came as the day was dawning and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was till it was light. So there's all kinds of things happening here that that are of a tragic nature, one thing on another. When her master arose in the morning and opened the doors of the house and went out to go his way, there was his concubine fallen at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. So he said to her, "Get up and let us be going." This is, as I said, look what he did to her. And he just assumes that she's going to continue to be his concubine and do what he says after what he did to her. Anyway, after the whole night. So, "Get up and let us be going." But there was no answer. So the man lifted her onto the donkey, and the man got up and went to his place. So she wound up dying from what they had done to her. When he entered his house, he took a knife, laid hold of his concubine, divided her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. So here he was the one, that offered her up, right? If you look back on it, even I think he was the one, but in any case, he allowed it. And yet, now that this happened, he takes her and the dead body, cuts it up, sends it to all the other tribes, and so it was that there really, in effect, were 13 tribes because Manasseh and Joseph were 2 tribes coming from Joseph. So it was that all who saw it said, "No such deed has been done or seen from the day that the children of Israel came up from the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, confer and speak up." So a conference is now going to be held about this horrible event that occurs. Now maybe the 12 tribes do include Benjamin. Maybe Joseph got one and some Benjamites got one as well. But it wouldn't seem like it based upon what we read later. Well, the Israelites got together and said, we need to punish those people. We need to get those people who did this in Gibeah, and they need to surrender these people to be punished for what they did. But the Benjamites decided to gather together and defend these criminals, and actually were willing to go to war against the rest of the nation. Now they were evidently a very talented tribe in warfare, and they were willing to take their chances against the other 11 tribes. It's incredible. that they wouldn't just give up these people who had obviously done something very wrong, but they gathered together and said no, and decided to go to war. So God did, to some degree, was consulted, but I don't think fully consulted. They asked God who ought to lead the battle, and he said Judah, which makes sense. And so Judah led the battle against the Benjamites, but the other tribes of Israel evidently were not as well organized, not as talented, even though they would have outnumbered the Benjamites. But at first the Benjamites did well. It's kind of like the American Civil War. The first Battle of Bull Run was a disaster for the North. The Battle of Manassas Junction, the first Battle of Manassas, or the Battle of Bull Run, and that's what happened. The North ran. But anyway, so they lose 22,000 in that battle. And God tells them to go up. They ask God, should we go up again? He says yes. But he didn't intervene for them to win. He just said, yeah, you ought to go up. But he didn't intervene for them to win. He more or less let them give it a shot. And they blew it the first time. And they blew it the second time. He lost 18,000 more. And so it seems that he was allowing them to be punished as well, as a part of his overall plan. They were probably asking him in a wrong attitude, assuming that they were so much, I guess, more powerful than the Benjamites. They asked him just, who should lead us? Where should we go? But it didn't seem like they were really seeking his help. That they really felt that they were depending on him. They were more depending on their own strength in overcoming the Benjamites. So finally, they fast and they come before God with sacrifices, and Phinehas the high priest is there. You can read the account. And I'm going to go to verse 28. And Phinehas the son of Eleazar the son of Aaron stood before it, the ark of the covenant, and Phinehas the son of Aaron stood before it in those days, saying, shall I yet again go out to the battle against the children of my brother Benjamin, or shall I cease? This was a brothers' war, as was our American war between the states. And the Lord said, go up, for tomorrow I will deliver them into your hand. Now they were in a proper frame of mind, really seeking God fully, and understanding that they needed God, not only his permission to do it, but his help in doing it. In spite of the fact that they thought, I guess that they could easily handle it. No, they couldn't. They had terrible losses. But now with God's help, they had a tremendous victory over the Benjamites. But then they really went overboard. I'm going to read only 600 men survived of the Benjamites. And let's go to verse 48 of Judges 20. And the men of Israel turned back against the children of Benjamin and struck them down with the edge of the sword from every city, men and beasts, all who were found. Men and beasts, all who were found. They also set fire to all the cities they came to. This was a war now of extermination. What kind of an attitude is that? So you wind up just with 600 men who are capable of keeping the tribe going. And the women are dead. And there's these 600 men surviving. So what's the solution? They realized that there was one city, Jabesh Gilead, in the northeast of the country. There was one city that hadn't participated, so they decided that city ought to be punished. But they destroyed everybody in that city, but preserved 400 virgins. Those, in other words, they wanted only eligible women to be saved. Everybody else they killed, but they saved the eligible women. They found 400 virgins in that town, and so they gave those 400 virgins to the Benjamites. But that still left 200 without wives. You with me on this? You can read this more fully in Judges 21. So what do we do about the other 200? Well, it turns out that in Shiloh, in the territory of Ephraim, by the way, Jabesh Gilead, I believe, was in East Manasseh. So Manasseh is a descendant of Joseph. And Ephraim is a descendant of Manasseh. So and Joseph is a descendant of Rachel. So the closest to Benjamin genetically would be Manasseh or Ephraim, because Joseph and Benjamin were children of Rachel. So the genetic makeup was similar. So the way it worked out is that we have Manassite women marrying Benjamite men. So that's 400 taken care of. Now we have Shiloh. We have a festival that's taking place there, and so the 200 other men can grab women from there. If you ever saw the movie Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, that's kind of how this would. That's sort of how this was handled. And these were women who evidently were Ephraimites. So again, they were genetically close to the Benjamites, descendants of Joseph. So why did this happen? Because they made a vow that their women, that they would not take, that they would not allow their women to marry Benjamites. Again, why did they do that? They made a vow that their women could not marry Benjamites, and so because they made the vow, look what they did because of the vow. They wound up massacring a town, taking these 400 women and giving them to the Benjamites, and then they had this other situation that they came up with, and I'll read about that because I think I do have time to read about that. They had made that oath, and I'm going to verse 18. However, we cannot give them wives from our daughters, for the children of Israel have sworn an oath, saying, "Cursed be the one who gives a wife to Benjamin." Then they said, in fact, there's a yearly feast of the Lord in Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem and south to Lebonah. Therefore, they instructed the children of Benjamin, saying, "Go lie wait in the vineyards." So this was evidently a wine festival, and very likely was the 15th day of the 5th month, Tu B'Av, which is a festival connected with the grape harvest. And in Israel today, it's a time for weddings, it's a time for engagements. It's similar to Valentine's Day in America, at least nowadays in Israel. This could be what that festival is. It doesn't say absolutely what the festival was. So you're going to see commentaries making different kind of comments. I would vote for 15th of Av, but we'll see. Therefore they instructed the children of Benjamin, saying, "Go lie and wait in the vineyards and watch. And just when the daughters of Shiloh come out to perform their dances, then come out from the vineyards, and every man catch a wife for himself from the daughters of Shiloh, then go to the land of Benjamin. Then it shall be, when the fathers or their brothers come to us to complain, that we will say to them, Be kind to them for our sakes, because we did not take a wife for any of them in the war, for it is not as though we have given the women to them at this time, making yourselves guilty of your oath." You see, everybody had made an oath. We're not going to give our daughters to Benjamin. But in this case, they took them. So therefore, you're free of your oath. You follow this? It gets messier and messier as we go along. And the children of Benjamin did so, and so they took enough wives for their number from those who danced, whom they caught. Then they went and returned to their inheritance, and they rebuilt the cities and dwelt in them. So the children of Israel departed from there at that time, every man to his tribe and family. They went out from there, every man to his inheritance. You see, this had all started because the children of Israel had wept bitterly. We've now exterminated a tribe. What are we going to do? I want to go back to verse 2. Then the people of Israel came to the house of God and remained there before God till evening. They lifted up their voices and wept bitterly and said, "O Lord God of Israel, why has this come to pass in Israel, that today there should be one tribe missing in Israel?" Well, they brought that about. They overdid the punishment, wouldn't you say? So they brought this about, and so they came up with their solution. And so Benjamin was preserved. The 600 men had 400 Manassite women, evidently 200 Ephraimite women, and the tribe was rebuilt, and over time it multiplied and became reestablished as a tribe, and we can read about it later on in history. There's a lot more about Benjamin, but what a messy scenario here, and notice how it concludes. This is the last verse of the book of Judges. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So we see that one way or the other, God was going to see to it that the tribe survived, and it did. And he also intended to chastise Israel for forsaking his way of life, which he did. Obviously, when we read this account, we see history. History is messy, as I said. Every nation that you read about, and even very, very great individuals, history is messy. But beyond that, we can learn from this account that society needs to have a stability. It needs to have a universal consensus about the basic ethical values of not doing harm to people, of trying to basically do good to people, of being fair to people, of not being dishonest to other people. No stealing, no murdering. There ought to be a general consensus of what is ethical. And at the time of the minor prophets, various philosophers arose throughout the world to bring people to ethical understanding, and various religions have arisen, and with all the faults that they have, but at least they generally do encourage people to behave themselves. But society needs to be organized in such a way that that ethics are taught and enforced. There needs to be some kind of organized society where these basic ethics are enforced. So we can't have everybody doing what is right in his own eyes. It's not going to work. And obviously, ideally, society ought to be based upon the Word of God. And so ultimately, the ideal society is Jesus Christ ruling with the saints under him, and the Word of God being the foundation. And that's why we pray every day, your kingdom come. The book of Proverbs tells us in verse 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones. In other words, sin is self-destructive. And so ultimately we look forward to God's kingdom when Jesus Christ and the resurrected saints will be ruling, and society will be based upon the Word of God. But one other point I want to bring out. These people should have known better. We had Joshua, we had the elders, and now a generation later we have people abandoning what they should have been struggling to preserve. This is a lesson for all of us that it can be over time that people can in effect forget what they ought to know, and can begin to make compromises, and it becomes a slippery slope, and it can be ultimately it becomes self-destructive. So we need to remember the commitment we made at baptism, and we need to keep it for our entire lives. I want to go to Matthew 24 and verse 13. Matthew 24 and verse 13. And I'll go to verse 12 because it's talking about a time near the end. And look at 2 Timothy 3. As we get near the time of the coming of Christ, there's going to be a tremendous amount of sin in the world. And therefore God's people could be pressed, either lured, seduced into it, or pushed into it of abandoning what their beliefs and practices that they know to be true. That's, of course, obviously self-destructive and a tremendously disastrous mistake. Matthew 24 and verse 12. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. So we do need to keep that commitment we made at baptism for all of our lives. So we have a tribe rescued, lessons learned. At least we can learn those lessons. All the best to you and yours.